Welcome to the Influential Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Duncan, and my dream is to inspire moms to pursue their goals and help them make a difference in their world. I'm a mom of 2 young boys, a wife to my high school sweetheart, and a lawyer. This show is a place to hear stories of moms working hard to have a positive influence in their profession or their community, and sometimes both, even as they juggle their responsibilities at work, at home, and to their children. You'll get tangible, practical tips for managing the chaotic world of motherhood and work. Come along as we hear these stories and feel inspired to step outside of our comfort zone as leaders and as a positive force within our communities. I believe that moms can change the world. Okay, so I'm here today with Stephanie Skryzowski, and she is a chief financial officer. She has a really interesting career background in that she has changed jobs, started a company, she's been through infertility, and all of that has happened throughout the course of her very young career. So welcome, Stephanie. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation. So you're a mom and you're a business owner. So tell us just a little bit about what you do and then take us back to the beginning of your career after you tell us what you do now, because I'm curious to kind of go back and hear how you started and then walk through the journey of how you got to doing what you're doing today and where motherhood has kind of fit into all of this.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, I am a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and I work with nonprofits and purpose-driven businesses around the globe. So I sort of serve in a fractional CFO capacity. So I really help leaders better understand and use their financials to make strategic, smart decisions for their organization. And so I own a company called 100 Degrees Consulting. And so we do basically all things numbers for all kinds of organizations globally. So I've got a couple other CFOs on my team that help serve clients. And I've been in business now for just over 3 years.
Wow, that's awesome. And so take us back to the beginning, because it didn't sound like you started out doing this kind of work. So take us to the very beginning of your career.
Yeah. So when I think about the beginning of my career, I actually think back to when I was like 12 years old, because I am very much a type A. I am very much a planner. And when I was 12, I visited a courtroom for a field trip in like 7th grade or something. Mm-hmm. And I just became obsessed with this idea of being a lawyer. And so like throughout middle school and high school, I read everything that John Grisham wrote. And I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what I'm going to do. So went to college, majored in political science, thinking, this is still my path. And then graduated in 3 years because I was just so anxious to get into the workforce. And I got a job at a massive law firm in midtown Manhattan. So I was like, fun. Yeah, I was like, okay, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I have to first be a legal assistant, and I can't just do it at any firm. It has to be like one of the top firms in the world in New York City. So that's what I did.
So you were like living a TV show, basically.
I mean, on the outside, yes.
I know. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
As a lawyer, I know that those things, like the TV show world and what actually happens, are 2 very different things. But just to say that you were working at a law firm in Midtown Manhattan sounds very TV show on the outside.
Yeah. And I was only 21 years old because I graduated college early. So I felt so fancy and so cool, like walking down 42nd Street in my stilettos every day. Like I thought I was pretty awesome. But then probably less than a year in, probably like 8 or 10 months in, I was like, actually, I hate everything about this. Mm-hmm. Working for a big firm is, you're sort of just a cog in the wheel. And as a legal assistant, I mean, you're doing virtually no interesting work whatsoever. And I mean, we were just going through like reams of paper and highlighting and redacting things. I mean, it was pretty painful. And of course, making like no money. Yeah. So I quickly realized, okay, I don't like this. I'm not feeling fulfilled, but I don't know what I want to do. I have no idea what else to do because I've been planning this for the last 10 years. And so I'm not one to give up on anything very easily. I'm very stubborn. And so I took the LSAT because I was like, I hate this, but I don't know what else to do. So I guess I'm going to law school.
Oh, man.
So yeah, I took the LSAT. Honestly, I didn't do very well, which was kind of a blow to me because standardized tests have kind of always been my thing. Like in, just growing up, they just kind of came naturally to me. It was easy for me. But the LSAT, I really did not do very well. And so that was what really was sort of got me thinking like, okay, I really, really don't think that this is for me. But while I was at the law firm, I was assigned to a partner at the firm who had founded this nonprofit organization that helped farmers in Afghanistan. She had traveled to Afghanistan in the 60s, like in a van, sort of like hippie in the hippie days. And she just had this passion for Afghanistan. And Afghanistan had been the land had been ravaged by 3 decades of war, internally and being attacked by the Russians and the Taliban. And they just were a mess. And so she started this organization to help farmers sort of rebuild their farm businesses so that they could earn money for their family and help widows be able to grow food for their children. And so I got involved with them. And as sort of my like pro bono work at the firm, I was helping plan events and do research on donors. And, they're a tiny organization. So doing a little bit of everything. And it clicked. I was like, okay, there's something here. Yes, I'm still doing like a lot of administrative work, but like I feel like it has a greater purpose that I can connect with. And so when I found that they were hiring somebody for their staff, like full time in New York, I was like, I have to do this. This is for me. And so I ended up getting that job. And that was really what sort of catapulted me into the rest of my career. That was kind of like the turning point.
Wow.
From there, I just worked for nonprofits for over a decade, working specifically in finance roles. If I wasn't going to major in political science in college, I would have majored in math. I like numbers, but I was like, I don't want to be a math teacher. So what do you do with a math degree?
Right.
So the numbers really clicked and, eventually was the CFO of about a $20 million nonprofit organization.
Oh, wow.
And I loved it. I got to travel the world, with the Afghanistan organization. I went to Afghanistan many, many times. And then with the next organization, I was in Haiti and Nepal and a handful of countries in Africa and Nicaragua. And it was like, that's basically how I spent my 20s, was traveling to like these off the beaten path destinations.
Wow.
It was like, it wasn't glamorous by any means, but it was like, I felt like I was living the dream, honestly.
Yeah. And you didn't have any kids, you weren't married. No. This was like just 20 something traveling the world kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. No kids. I was with my husband. We got married when I was like 27, but we were together that entire time. So, he was kind of growing and building his career and I was doing my thing traveling around. We actually got to go to Nepal for our honeymoon and hike up to Mount Everest base camp. So he's done like a little bit of the sort of adventure travel with me, which is cool.
That is cool.
But the job at that last nonprofit where I was a CFO, we had gotten to the point where I was like turning 30. I'm like, okay, actually it was probably a couple of years before that. Like, okay, we really I want to have a kid now. And so, we were trying and nothing was working. And so, my job, I would say, was pretty stressful, but I didn't really attribute that as a factor as to why we weren't getting pregnant. So we kind of went through and had all the tests from the infertility doctors. And of course, they came back completely inconclusive, which is not helpful at all. It's almost like when you go through that, you almost want them to find something wrong with you so that they can fix it.
Yeah,
exactly. But they found nothing. So I eventually, after like 5 or 6 years of that organization, made the really difficult decision to leave. I really ended up feeling very strongly that the reason I wasn't getting pregnant was because I was so stressed from that job.
Yeah.
And so So I took another job. There was a ton of travel involved. So I took another job closer to home at a university. And it was one of those jobs where you go into the office and, you work maybe like 2 or 3 hours out of the day because there's just not that much to do. And then I'm just like sitting here surfing the internet for 5 hours a day and still hadn't gotten pregnant at that point. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Where am I going? Are we never going to have kids? Like I just felt it was a very, very, very low point for me.
Yeah.
And so I actually hired a coach, at that time, and I met her at an event. And because I was like, I don't know what to do with myself, I started going to a therapist, but it just didn't seem like it was addressing what I was feeling and what I wanted to do. Because I was really feeling an itch for some sort of career change. I just wasn't feeling fulfilled. So I started working with this coach, and, I said, I think I have this idea. I think that there are nonprofit organizations out there who need a CFO, but they can't afford one full time, or maybe they don't even need one full time. And I think I could do that. Like, I think I could be like a CFO consultant. And so she really helped me work through that business idea while I was still employed at the university. We were also simultaneously going through IVF. And so I started sort of feeling the tides turn, I guess, and feeling a little bit more positive about the trajectory of what was happening. And so she really helped give the idea wings. And so I just started reaching out I did a ton of research online. 9 nonprofit organizations' tax returns are public information. And so on that tax return, they have a ton of information on obviously all their financial information, revenue, expenses, assets, and liabilities, all of their staff and their salaries. It's all public information. So I started doing a lot of research and trying to figure out like, okay, what type of organizations would be like the best fit for what I'm talking about here. So after doing all this research, I started just sending emails to people, executive directors, CEOs of these nonprofits saying, hey, I think you might need a CFO. Do you want to talk? And so that's how I got my first 4 clients while I was still employed at the university. And then just a couple months later, we got pregnant. Finally.
Oh my goodness.
So it was like, like a switch flipped or something. And so, so we got pregnant with my daughter. And then about 6 months into my pregnancy, actually, I think it was about 3 or 4 months into my pregnancy, I decided to leave the university and just go all in on the business. And I was like, it's got some wheels now. There's interest in this idea. I think I could build it into more. And so throughout the rest of my pregnancy, I just really focused on going all in on the business, building up as big a client roster as I could, and also trying to set aside some money for maternity leave because self-employed, you really don't have a paid maternity leave. And so, through working with my coach, she was able to kind of help me do that. And so then I had my daughter and have been just going like full steam ahead with the business ever since.
Wow. That is an amazing story. So I want to break it down a little bit. So I want to go back to when you were working at the university and you were having these questions around like, okay, I changed jobs. Now, we've taken the work stress piece out of the equation, but it sounds like you were having a little bit of I don't want to say identity crisis, but kind of like this existential, what am I going to do for my career? Am I going to end up having a family? Are we going to be, what do they call it? Dinks, dual income, no kids.
Yes. Yes.
And so when you found your coach, were you actively seeking a coach? And was this like a life coach or a business coach? Kind of talk us through how you ended up being connected with your coach at the point that you were having this kind of existential moment of where do I go next?
Yeah. So I knew that I needed somebody, I obviously have my husband, of course, and he's very, very supportive of all the decisions I've made. And I'm very grateful for that. But it was like, I I don't know. I feel like as women, I just, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I just like talk an idea to death. And, at a certain point, he's like, okay, enough. So I was like, I need someone to talk to. So like I said, I started with a therapist, and that just wasn't connecting with me because I didn't feel like I needed to like, unearth some like childhood to trauma. It was more like, I need a future plan. Like, how am I going to like be the person that I want to be and have the career I want to have? I just feel so stuck right now. And so I was a member of the junior league where we lived, and my coach was a speaker there one night, and she did sort of like, I don't know, kind of like a motivational speech that was, the Junior League is a community service organization. So she just kind of came in and did a talk that was like motivational and inspiring and interesting about sort of shining and being brilliant and really living like your full life. And so she had like a very soft pitch at the end, like, hey, if you're interested in learning more, just like text this number. So I did. Got on the phone with her for, a sort of consultation. And she's I would say she's a business coach with, some life coaching stuff in there, but she's primarily a business coach. And so, I just felt like she had, and she was like a veteran of like a huge company before she had started her coaching business. And so I felt like she had the career and business knowledge that I really wanted. And she's about 10 years ahead of me in life. And she's just like, she was where I wanted to be. And so I felt that connection with her. And I was like, okay, I need your help. You got to help me with this.
Yeah. So it's funny that you say 10 years ahead because a couple of episodes ago, we had Deirdre Fitzpatrick, who's a news anchor out in Sacramento, California. And she was talking about mentors and how you need a mentor. One of the types of mentors she said that you need is one who's about 10 years ahead of you in your career and kind of in where you want to be. So I think that fits perfectly with what she was saying, in her in that episode, and is, I think, proof that that it works. And even though this was more of a coaching capacity, I think the word mentor can kind of be defined in a lot of different ways. So are you still, has this person continued working with you through kind of where you are today? Or was there a launching point where it was like, okay, now go and, be successful?
No, I still work with her now, actually.
Awesome.
Yeah. 3.5 years later, we were just talking about it the other day that I can't believe it's been that long, but I feel like through every part of my journey, first it was like, okay, I'm miserable in my career and I want to have a baby. Then it was like, I have a newborn. How do I handle my life?
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, I have the kid thing kind of, the situation sort of under control now. Now, how do I scale my business? And so she has really been my sort of guide and mentor. And I honestly, unless I decide to shut the business down, I can't imagine a situation where I would not be working with her, because I just think that having that person, whoever they may be in your life, is just so important. It's hard to do this alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially in starting your own business, when you don't have kind of a built-in support system that you would have if you were going to work, and trying to build your career within an organization, it is important to have somebody who can kind of see the path that you're walking, kind of as you're walking it. So I think that's awesome. So when you started cold emailing folks, these nonprofits, and saying, here's how I think that I can help you, that requires business savvy, and the savvy that you obviously had that because it worked in sounds like a pretty short period of time. So did that savvy that you had just come from your work experience to that point, or did you try to kind of train yourself up in that aspect of it, like how to kind of market yourself? Or is that something that you felt like you had kind of gained along the way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was thinking about that recently because I had tried like another round of cold emailing, potential clients, and it wasn't landing. And so, back when I did this 3.5 years ago, I basically just wrote an email like from my heart, like, hey, I'm really passionate about what you guys are doing, and this is the way that I'm connected to your mission, and I would love to be able to, to help you with your financial management. Do you want to set up a time to chat? And it was like very casual, very just like me to them. And, I think in the past few years, it's so easy to get caught up in what everybody else is doing and what are the best practices and what should your cold email say? And I found that as I am sort of changing what I'm doing based on like what I'm Googling, it isn't as effective. And so I guess I found that like just me being myself and doing things totally naively and blindly actually worked a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, and I have a theory about that. I think that's probably because now everybody's emails all sound the same because they're all, using the same, I mean, not exactly the same, but kind of this, using air quotes template that these articles and blogs are putting out there as far as how to do these cold emails. So now they all sound the same. But when you come from the heart and you resonate with their mission, it shows that you really care about their mission, and you're not just spitting out, 100 cold emails that are copy and paste.
Right.
So I think that that's a really neat story and something that people need to hear if they're wanting to be effective in cold emails. Hey friends, popping into this fun episode to remind you to take a quick second to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And don't forget, you can also sign up for bonus episodes and content from my monthly newsletter at melissaduncan.com/join. Thanks for listening, and let's get back to the show. Is there something that you would say as you reflect back on your career so far that you would say has been your biggest setback or failure? I know a lot of us are scared of that F word, failure, but so setback is the alternative, but is there something that you might look back on and say, wow, that was a big setback, but it actually might have been for the better, in the long run?
Yeah, that's such a good question because I, as a perfectionist type A, don't really like to fail at anything.
Yeah, I hear you.
So, but what's interesting is I've been thinking like earlier this year, like what were my biggest lessons learned last year? Last year was a pretty big growth year for the company. And so I realized that all of my lessons learned and all of the like big quote unquote issues that I had in 2018 were rooted in fear. And, I said yes to clients that treated me poorly before we even started working together because I had a fear that there would be no more clients left. Like I had this scarcity fear. Yeah. And I let a client go on for too many months without paying me. And I never ended up recovering the money because I was afraid of like inconveniencing them by asking them for the money that they owed me for work that I had already done.
Yeah, that you had earned.
Yeah. And, I often, even when I'm like, I wrote this article that I think is really good and valuable and useful to people, I'm like afraid still of posting it on LinkedIn because I'm afraid somebody's going to find out that like I'm a phony and I don't know what I'm talking about. So all of these things, like it's all rooted in fear. And so I think that, it's just something that like, I think I'm just going to have to keep being brave and like getting out of my comfort zone and pushing through these things. But I would say, pretty much all of the biggest failures I've sort of, I've encountered are all rooted in this fear.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you, as you reflect back on that from 2018, have you done anything differently for yourself in 2019 to try to get past that?
Yeah, so I've said no to a handful of clients this year that, upon initial conversation, I get a gut feeling that like this is not the client for me. I've said no. I don't think we're the best fit, and just moved on. And it's felt so good to not have this like weight of like, oh, I know this client is going to be a nightmare, but I'm taking them anyway. So yeah, I mean, I've definitely said no. I've asked for money that I have earned. So I think those ones I'm like, I'm good, but I'm sure some other thing is going to come up that I'm going to have to get way outside of my comfort zone again.
Yeah, that's hard. That is hard. And I think especially when you're in the early stages of a business my husband and I started a law firm together. And I remember in the beginning, it was hard to say no to the cases that, same kind of thing. You thought, oh, this client, but in the very beginning, you think this is not going to end well. But you're scared because it's like, what if this is the last client, and what if nobody shows up tomorrow? And so it's hard to say no, but I think when you do start saying no, then the more you do it, the easier it becomes, because it's like, okay, I can do this and the business is not going to end. Yes. And you're actually taking care of yourself and your other clients by kind of cutting that, the dead weight off the client list that's not paying and yet still taking up your time.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's awesome. So when you talk about infertility, I've dealt with infertility as well when we were trying to get pregnant with our oldest son. And I did not have to end up going through IVF. I took some medication, but I remember some of the things that people said to me that it was like, ouch, this is really not helpful. As you reflect back on that, being at work and trying to kind of push through the internal struggles that you were going through, and you were changing jobs and you had a lot going on. Is there anything in particular that somebody said that made it better for you? What was said that made it much worse, so that people who are listening might know, oh, that's something helpful to say, or that's something that's really not helpful to say?
Yeah, I think that, being asked the question, oh, when are you going to have kids? That just was like a knife in the heart anytime anyone, family, friends, coworkers, whoever would ask, or even like, oh, do you have any kids? Like, oh, nice to meet you. Do you have any kids? It was like, no, is that the only thing that matters? No, I don't have any kids.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
So just being asked questions that are very like presumptuous was really hard. And, sometimes if it was a family member, I'm like, no, I'm trying, and like burst into tears. So that's really hard to just assume that people want kids, assume that they're not trying. That's really hard for somebody, I think, going through infertility. Yeah. Honestly, what was most helpful to me was in the nonprofit job and then moving to the university. When I was going through treatment, I actually told my boss, and both times the boss was male. And so it wasn't exactly like a, girl to girl kind of conversation. So it was, I don't know if it was easier or harder because of that, but I actually was like, I just came clean and was like, listen, I'm going through fertility treatment right now. I'm going to be asking for, time off. It's a little bit unpredictable because, you kind of have to go, I didn't, get into details, but you kind of have to go with like when your cycle is happening, and you can't often predict when you're going to have a doctor's appointment next. And so I was just honest with both of them. And I don't know if it was because they like didn't want to ask too many questions, but they were very, very supportive. And that was like a weight lifted, just because I didn't feel like I had to kind of creep around and like sneak out and, try to make it to appointments and like cross my fingers that I didn't miss a meeting or something. So I think just being out in the open with it, and I'm a very, very private person. I don't share like personal details like that with like anyone. Like we didn't even tell our own parents that we were going through infertility treatment, but I did tell my bosses, and that was really helpful. So I would definitely encourage anybody that's going through it and is working for somebody else that it's hard, but just being able to be open about it with your boss or your colleagues, I think it was a huge weight lifted for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And I'm so thankful that you had that kind of support, that you did feel like you could tell your boss that this is something that you were going through that, might affect your availability, but would not be affecting, obviously, your work quality. But I think it's helpful. I'm a manager of 4 people. And so, as a manager, I think to myself, I would if the person's comfortable, I would much rather know if there's something that's really impactful to their life, going on, so that I can be supportive and can say, I can tell you're having a hard day, just take the day and go, and so I'm sure your manager appreciated that because it allowed them to better support you, which is beneficial on all ends. That helps you, it helps them be a better manager. And unfortunately, I don't think everybody can have those conversations with their bosses because not all managers are that supportive, but how wonderful, because that took some additional stress off, I'm sure. So that's wonderful. So what did you started to reference this when you were walking us through your career path thus far, but what did maternity leave look like for you because you were an entrepreneur?
I would say it was like a sort of maternity leave. I had saved up some money in those few months before my daughter was born, so that if I had to cut back on clients, like it would be okay financially. But I definitely worked for the first couple months. I would say, I would kind of pop on emails and do what needed to be done to service the 3 or 4 clients I had at that point. And, I didn't have anybody on my team. I mean, it was just me doing it at that point. But I would say, I was working a couple hours a day. And, since obviously not like the really, really newborn beginning, but since, pretty early on in my daughter's life, I am so grateful that she has been a very good sleeper. So, she would take, even in the first, like maybe when she was 6 weeks old, she would take like a couple 3-hour naps a day. And so
that's good.
In addition to, using some of that time to take care of myself, I was able to get some client work done too.
Yeah.
And my husband, he worked for a company that actually gave 6 weeks of parental leave to fathers too, which I totally recognize is not the norm pretty much anywhere. So for her first 6 weeks, I had a lot of help.
That is amazing.
I know, I'm so grateful. And I talked to friends who are like, oh yeah, my husband went back to work like on Monday, like following the birth. I'm like, I can't imagine. I'm very, very grateful. I realize that's like a major privilege. But I remember I took a call with a client, like I think 7 days after she was born. And I was like, afterwards, I'm like looking at my notes. They were totally incoherent. I was like, my brain was so foggy. I had no idea what we had talked about. I was like, okay, no more client calls for like at least another month because that was not good. So yeah, if we do it again, I think I would give myself a bit more of a break than that.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you had that support there. I mean, what a beautiful combination, to be an entrepreneur and be able to manage your maternity leave as you wanted to do, but then also to have your husband there with you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up, what would be your one piece of advice for a mom who has little ones or is thinking about trying to get pregnant, and is also in the midst of starting a business? If you could kind of be that coach or that mentor looking backwards, what would be your one piece of advice?
Yeah, I think I would say that I really truly believe that like almost anything is possible. And I think that, pretty much anybody can start a business or can, start some sort of new venture. But I think the thing that I wish I would have known is that it's going to take sacrifice. Like we cannot physically do it all at 100% all of the time. And being like a super overachiever, I thought that I could. And I realize now that like I did make some pretty big sacrifices to really focus on building my business and raising my daughter at the same time. So for the first year of her life, I had basically like 2 things in my life, and it was her and my business, and pretty much everything else went to the wayside. Like fitness, date nights, friends, like that was all back burner. And so I was conscious about it. Like I knew I was making those sacrifices, but I think that's what I would say is I really think anything is possible, but for that short season while things are building and growing, I think people need to sort of realize that you have to make some sacrifices in order to really get where you want and get to that next level.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. And it sounds like things have probably kind of recalibrated a little bit for you now that the business is up and running and your daughter's a little bit older. It all starts to recalibrate, hopefully. So
yes, it does. And then you're in sort of a new season. So yeah.
So speaking of new seasons, what is next for Stephanie and for the business? Do you have some goals for 2019 that you're trying to work towards?
Yeah. So this year, in terms of the business, is really a building year. So last year, we tried a lot of new things, brought a bunch of new team members on. And instead of this year getting distracted by all the shiny things on the internet, I made my 2019 word of the year is build. And so I really want to build on the foundation of what we have, continue serving the clients that we have, and just really strengthening what we already do without taking anything new on.
Yeah.
And that is aligned with the goal of getting pregnant with number 2.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So now would be a good time to really continue building that strong foundation. So hopefully by the end of the year, maybe there will be another maternity leave in our future.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I will be keeping my fingers and toes and all of those things crossed for you all that will be happening, because I know how hard that struggle is to think about going through it again, and what that might look like is hard when you're thinking about number 2. So
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So you have a profit playbook that might be helpful to some listeners, and we're going to link to it in the show notes. But can you talk a little bit about that so that people can know what it is and whether it might help them, and then they can go look for it in the show notes?
Sure. So it's just a free PDF download. And basically what it does is kind of walk you through the 3 steps to really mastering your financials. And it's really geared towards business financials and not really personal. But mastering your numbers, understanding your numbers, and using your numbers to help grow your business and really grow your bottom line without doing any crazy, first of all, no crazy math or accounting involved at all.
Amen. That's wonderful.
Yes. So don't be scared by that. But, without any crazy tactics, but basically helping you sort of plan your profit. And so, so we'll link to it. It's like I said, it's just like a 5 or 7 page PDF download.
That's awesome. And so you don't have to be a nonprofit to
no
use this PDF. So that's awesome. So we'll link to the Profit Playbook, and remind us again as we wrap up where to find you and the name of your consulting business.
Sure. So we are 100degreesconsulting.com, and it's the number 100. And so that's where I hang out a lot. And we're 100 Degrees Consulting on Facebook as well. And then I've got my personal Instagram that you can put that in the show notes, but I don't need to say that.
Yeah, that's okay. And just to clarify, is your consulting, do you do a lot of this remotely, or is this do you go and sit down and meet with the nonprofits or companies that you end up working with?
So it's a little bit of both. I would say probably 80% remote.
Okay.
We've got clients all over the world, East Coast to West Coast in the US, and then all the way to East Africa. So,
wow. So you haven't stopped traveling then.
I've slowed down. I'm actually in Chicago right now with a client this week. But I have, I keep most of my travel domestic now.
Yeah. Well, that's good because as we said, seasons change. So,
yes.
Well, congratulations on all of the growth that you've had over the last few years. That's just incredible that you kind of set out with this vision and here you are. So, it's exciting and I'm sure encouraging for folks who are listening who are kind of in that boat of what's next? Where do I go next? So thanks so much for sharing your story, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we'll put out all the links for people to find you online so they can follow you and get the Profit Playbook.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for tuning in for another inspiring episode of the Influential Motherhood podcast. Be sure to follow my own journey in motherhood and work at Melissa Duncan JD on Instagram, and follow the behind the scenes of the podcast at Influential Motherhood on Instagram and Facebook. If you're enjoying the Influential Motherhood podcast, please take a second to leave a rating or review in iTunes. It is how you can help other moms find the show so they can be inspired by these stories. See you next week.